Hello and welcome to Newsbreak at 7. I'm Veera Raghav. The issue that we are in focus this evening is the controversy around FCRA, NGOs and anti-coal mining protests. 4 months after its license for receiving foreign donations was revoked, one of the country's leading public policy think tanks, the Center for Policy Research, CPR, lost tax exemption status it had for almost 5 decades. This was a few days ago. This is not the first time that a foreign-funded organization has come under the scanner or has been accused of carrying out activism. In this case, allegedly by promoting protests against coal mining activities in some of the country's poorest districts, especially Chhattisgarh. Allegation is also that foreign donations meant for research was used for this activism. This brings to focus 2 separate issues. One is on the question of FCRA itself. Is there scope for it being misused by NGOs? Are they misusing it? Or are they being targeted for free and independent thought and criticism? The other, and specifically in the context of anti-coal mining protests and activism in general, are there vested foreign interests, as alleged, that are promoted through foreign funding in activism used by these NGOs and protests against coal mining in this case specifically? Joining us this evening, Suhas Chakma, Director, Rights and Risks Analysis Group, joins us from New Delhi. K. Badrinath, Director and Chief Executive, Center for Integrated and Holistic Studies. He joins us as well. My first question to you, Mr. Suhas, what would be your response to the insinuation that NGOs could potentially misuse foreign funds and are misusing foreign funds to promote activism in areas which could be detrimental for India?
I do not think the NGOs, either in India or anywhere else in the world, actually pose any threat to any government or work on behalf of any other government. If we look at the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, when it was brought in 1976, it was essentially brought against the political parties. Then it was changed in 1984, wherein the NGOs were brought within the ambit of the FCRA Act. So if you look at the FCRA Act today, the main purpose when it was enacted in 1976 was basically to ensure sovereignty of India so that people do not, or the foreign countries do not interfere in the internal affairs of India. So political parties, the election candidates, the judges, journalists, government officials, we are not allowed. And today what do we have? We have the electoral bond, which which allows a foreign company to actually purchase electoral bonds of the political parties who run this country. On the other hand, if you look at the Section 2G of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, a foreign entity is described as an entity which is owned by a foreign company, but actually registered in India. So the NGOs in the country actually cannot receive foreign funds, but the governments, basically the political parties, can actually receive the foreign funds. So the whole system, when the FCRA was brought in 1976, to make sure that the political parties do not receive foreign funds, has been changed completely. Now, this country is run by the government, by the NGOs or the political parties. If it is run by the political parties.
Let me take that point across to Mr. Badri. Let me take that point that you're making, the initial point that you made, let me take that across to Mr. Badrinath and get a response from it. Sir, your thoughts on that same issue?
Okay. The 2 things. In the voluntary sector, as far as I understand, there is enough money within the country to fund all legitimate development activities, and hence my guess is that we may not be requiring foreign funds to run development activities. Number 1. Number 2, even if some NGOs are getting foreign funds, and if they are doing any legitimate activities, they should not be prevented from doing those activities across. Third point I would like to make is that political parties cannot receive, foreign funds. And my guess is your political activity cannot be funded by, say, Communist Party of China, or maybe the, perhaps North Korean, military establishment, or something like that. So point I'm trying to make is any legitimate activity happening in this country as per laws of this land have to be respected, protected, encouraged, and also they should be allowed to work fearlessly. And if I know, as per, I'm just going through the Home Ministry website, there are more than 16,257 NGOs in this country which are getting foreign funds even today.
Right.
So, what I'm trying
Right.
to say is foreign funding for legitimate on the ground activities completely welcome as per the even the existing
Okay.
provisions of the FCRA.
All right, I take that point. Let me take that point also across. Joining us in this conversation is Mr. Vikas Singh, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court and President of the Supreme Court Bar Association as well. Thank you, Mr. Singh, for joining us. My first question to you, sir, is this: that, you know, FCRA is a conversation that's gone on for many years. Is it being misused? Well, how do we then prevent it from being misused either by the NGOs or by enforcement agencies allegedly doing selective targeting? How do we ensure that neither side and no one misuses FCRA provisions?
So, well, to start with, you should correct, I'm not the president of the bar anymore. My tenure has ended and I had done 2 years. I could not contest this year.
Sorry, former president of the bar.
Former president, yeah.
Sorry.
Now, as far as the FCRA misuse is
Error
concerned,
of habit, sorry.
As far as the 2020 amendment that came into the FCRA, that actually was sufficient to plug the method by which misuse could happen in the FCRA. So one of the very major things that happened was that administrative expenses was reduced, and you could not do more than 20% of administrative expense as against 50%. You have to get all money through SBI only. And one, company could not, one recipient could not transfer to another recipient. Now that had some problems also during the pandemic. For instance, there were cases where one NGO had those equipments to give to people, but it could not give it to other NGOs, with the result that they in fact moved the court. In fact, I appeared for them also. And the court took the view that individual cases should be looked at and the government should pass a necessary exemption order. So I think after the 2020 amendment, every money has to come through only State Bank of India. So there is a huge amount of control on the complete functioning of the NGOs. Now, what is happening, and that is what the fear of the civil society is, that anybody who's trying to find anything which is not, acceptable to, the government, that is something which is being targeted for the purposes of, taking action. And that is something which should not happen. Ultimately, we are a democracy, we are a robust democracy, and we have to, function in an environment where we are used to accepting an adverse view also. And accepting an adverse view is the hallmark of any, functional and a healthy democracy. So, and I feel that people who are, collecting or collating information which may be not, palatable to the government, may also have, even if they are, looking at only one side of the picture and not giving a very, very, proper, I would say, honest view. At least that can be used for the purpose of doing a course correction to see that if there is anything, wrong happening in their functioning or not, in their own functioning, rather than because if you see, our country has guaranteed free speech, and free speech means that if you are, and that is guaranteed to even a non-citizen. So if you are guaranteeing free speech, then even collecting information which may be unpalatable to you should not be something which. And I don't agree that our country has enough donors and we don't need foreign donors at all. Because if you will recall, during the pandemic, our country was not in a sufficiently equipped to deal with the problems of the people, and people from abroad. A lot of these NGOs came in and they Yeah.
You're underlining 3 points. One is there is a need for foreign funds. B, there is a need for responsible use of those funds. And C, there is
Absolutely.
also a need for responsible enforcement of the regulations. Let me go back to Mr. Suhas Chakma. Sir, this is not the first time that one has seen allegations like which has been made against CPR, that the money has come in primarily for research purposes and it has been used for activism in anti-coal mining activities in Chhattisgarh. We have also seen similar allegations that have been made as far as the anti-Sterlite plant protests as well in the past. Given the context, and this is not now, or we've seen several of this made earlier as well, given that context, how do we make sure that in an issue like coal activism, which is anti-coal mining activism, which is a very delicate issue, that foreign funds is not misused to peddle a vendetta or an agenda? I mean, can we completely disregard that allegation at this stage?
No, I would say at this point of time or any point of time, if somebody wants to conduct a research on the impact of the coal mining, I mean, what could you do? I mean, they will continue to do it. And large number of organizations, for example, if you look at the Organization of Human Rights Law Network, though the FCRA license has been cancelled, but the individual lawyers continue to take up the cases. So it happens with number of organizations, individuals who are known in this country. I think where the problem comes is on the issue of implementation. Look, I mean, in 2018 Finance Act, the Congress Party and the BJP, who were caught, and against some adverse remarks were passed by the Delhi High Court for taking money from a foreign entity, they passed a legislation to exempt themselves from the ambit of the FCRA Act retrospectively. That's one issue. The second issue, if we look at today, we are talking about foreign funds. The PM Cares Fund is one of the organizations which receives foreign funding. Now, if an organization led by the Prime Minister himself receives foreign funding, why can't the people in this country receive foreign funding? And look at the FCRA Act. Section 50 of the FCRA Act says the organizations which are audited by the CAG shall be exempted from, FCRA. Now, PM Cares Fund is not audited by, say, the CAG, but it is exempted. So I think where the problem lies is the way the government actually used the FCRA Act. And so the accountability is not the same for everybody.
I get it. I understand the point that you're making as far as NGOs is concerned, but I will get back to that point finally. But before that, perhaps another issue. I mean, how serious are these allegations that have been made that some of these protests with foreign funds, I mean, when you have foreign funds coming in, could provide or fuel a vendetta or an agenda, a foreign agenda, which may not necessarily be in the interest of domestic economy or other domestic growth prospects. Mr. Badrinath, how serious is that allegation and how seriously should that be taken?
If there are allegations against a particular NGO, either in the case of CPR or in the case of Greenpeace or in the case of anti-Sterlite protests, which are funded by organizations, or Christian conversions, or any other activity that we would look at. If they are not in the interests of the basic tenant or in compliance with the basic tenets of this country, they should be rejected outright. They have no business to do any anti-India activities. If they are in compliance with the laws of the land, they are welcome to work here, and if they are not, they have no business to be here. Either the funds should not be allowed or the organization should be restrained. If both are not done, then there is likely to be big chaos in this country, which will be unmanageable. You have seen the nuclear protests
Mr. Suhas,
nuclear plant protests. So what I would propose
in Kudankulam.
Is that, Kudankulam. So if that is the case, then why do we, what should be economic or development agenda of this country is not going to be decided by a foreign funded NGO which has vested interests. Should that be allowed to happen? Is my big question. And if they are violating the laws of the land, For example, the Center for Policy Research, by diverting funds from research for organizing, protests against mining.
Okay.
Whatever is the company, I least care about which company, whether it is a government company, private company, or a foreign company.
Okay.
If legal mining license is there, and if they still want to see that pull down the mining part, then should that be allowed? Is the question. So what I'm trying to say is, if the foreign
I'm
funds
taking.
are, sorry, please.
No, I get the point that you're making. I mean, it's a fine line that we are talking about, but a fine line between ensuring that freedoms are protected in terms of freedom of speech, Mr. Suhas, as we go forward. It's a fine line. It's a delicate balancing act that one needs to do as far as this is concerned. But in terms of how do we then protect all sides? How do we then ensure that it's neither misused and no one is targeted?
No, I think we have to take cognizance of the fact that the Adivasis or any other people who are affected by projects, they have been protesting even before the FCRA Act came into force, before 1976. So if you look at the displacement of people, whether they are impacted by, mining, a dam or any other thing, when somebody's house is actually, taken away or he or she displaced, people protest. So now I would say that whether there is foreign funding or not, if people are displaced, they shall continue to be protesting. It has nothing to do with the foreign funding. You look at any community in the Northeast or anywhere, people who are protesting are basically people who are affected by the project. So it doesn't have to do any with foreign funding.
Okay.
And we have to recognize that.
Right. A quick last word, Mr. Badrinath. You were going to finish your point. Quick last word and a response to that.
I beg to differ with Suhag, because in this particular case of CPR, the funding for anti-mining protests were provided by CPR. And this is the fund that was taken from other organizations for conducting research. If you take the funds for research and put them into activism for something else, is what is the violation that Income Tax Department or FCRA provisions are talking about. So if this violation has to be stopped, this has to be stopped immediately and a big full stop. And we cannot just say that, okay, you do anything. I mean, protests are welcome in a democratic
We'll have to put a full stop.
We have to put a full stop to this
Unfortunately, we'll have to put a full stop to this
violations.
Unfortunately, we'll have to put a full stop to this conversation. The jury is out. There are two sides to this story and two very strong sides to this story which needs to be discussed and debated. That's all we have time for on this conversation.